And now is Cynthia here?
Yeah, right here.
Yay! Cynthia!
Oh, the technology worked.
Oh my God. So let me introduce Cynthia. Cynthia is Cynthia, I adore you, Cynthia. I'm Italian, so I had to be Catholic by choice, forced into it, and I loved it. And then in my 20s, I decided to go back, and I tried to become a monk in my 20s, and I went to a convent, and I went there, and after a week they kicked me out. I was too, because I basically said something like, but why the Pope is behind bulletproof window when he goes around? Is he afraid he has no faith? And the prior of the convent came to me the next morning at 6 o'clock when we were chanting, and he told me, I think you're not ready for communal life, and kick the hell out. That was 7 days of monastic life of me. But as I told you when you spoke at Cynthia, if I would have met you at that time, I still will be a Christian boy. A rebel like you, but still a Christian boy. So
Sorry, we could have had.
So no, I have to tell this story because every time I see you or Richard Rohr, I think about that. I said, why did I meet that guy and not those guys? Anyway, so let me stop regressing and bring my honor to you. First of all, I want to read a brief, biography. So Cynthia is passionately committed to the recovery of the Christian contemplative and wisdom tradition within an inclusive contemporary framework. She considers herself a wisdom activist, offering her work as a meeting ground where timeless spiritual wisdom, too often embalmed in esotericism, can powerfully engage the needs of our own time. Cynthia, this community has seen you a couple of times, and you have always been like so precious to us. It's such an honor to have you here with us.
Oh, well, thank you. What a delight to see these two shining faces. And I can see just by the person who's sitting next to you, Maurizio, why God is great in not letting you be a monk. He had better things in store for you, my lad.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. So I've joined this seminar, and the title of what I'm going to sort of pitch my comments around are The Roots of Hope Run Deep. And what I want to talk about for a little while before we get into a dialogue and an interview and questions from the floor, I want to lay some maps out before you. Some maps that come from various traditions, because as the Buddhists say so well, the map is not the sea, but a right view helps. And a wrong view definitely gets in the way, and having no orientation at all, which is, I think, where we're pinned right now, just leaves you in a state of confusion. So you can say that what has befallen the planet is all random. You can say, just another thing that happens in this erratic meandering of incidental things. But, there is something about this coronavirus that's a little bit too stealthy, a little bit too intelligent, a little bit too shape-shifting, that people can't help register that it's programmed to kill, and that it's going to take out a certain percentage of the human race, whatever we do. And that's positively unnerving, of course, the feeling that we're being attacked on all sides by an invisible enemy that seems to have the idea in mind of thinning the human horde. And so how do we make sense of this? And the human mind, I think, is really kind of programmed anyway to be a map maker. we want to make sense of things. That's part of what it really means to be human. We sit here and we try and figure it out and think about it. But I think in our particular case, it's really important to have the right map, because I think there are some things that we could actually be doing and doing differently, and that nobody's getting to them because they don't have a picture that's quite broad enough and yet specific enough. Because the map that contains the real places where we could bring some new leverage to what's going on are not in common circulation, certainly in our culture. So what I want to do is to lay out some of the maps and spend a little time with the last of one, which I'm going to be working with, which is the Imaginal Map, which will be the subject of my next book that'll be out in September if the publishing business is still on its feet by then. Anyway, when we look around in our Western culture, whose roots are overwhelmingly Judeo-Christian, we don't need to look very far to find the first map. It tumbles right out at us. It's in our bloodline. And that's the Old Testament map of the scourging and avenging God. And of course, you've got this over and over and over throughout the whole Old Testament. God is angry because Israel's done something else to insult him or irritate him, and boom, the next thing you know, there's a scourge, there's a plague, there's locusts, there's, and so the setup is quite dramatic. We have this capricious, volatile God, and human beings are always displeasing this God, are always getting themselves into some scrape or another, and so God responds by corrective plagues, pestilences, scourges. And in this map, it's a map we love to hate nowadays, and I hate it too for reasons I'll tell you, but it does have one thing going strongly for it. And that is that it really encourages us as human beings to step up to the plate, look deeply into our own hearts, evaluate what we might have been doing wrongly to contribute to the conference, to the catastrophe, and it invites us to repentance, which doesn't mean feeling sorry for yourself, but as my teacher Thomas Keating used to say, change the direction you're looking for happiness. And if we could actually do that on the planet now, we'd change the whole thing. But so it has that in that it really places blame, gets the inner attitude correct for a real change of heart, and starts us off in the right, on a step towards a different path of action. But the drawback of this map is, of course, obvious, that it belongs to and it depicts a highly anthropomorphic God, capricious, volatile, endowed with all of the worst traits of humanity. And at its time, this may have been, and I say it was definitely an evolutionary breakthrough. To understand a covenantal relational God, it actually does have a celebrated place in the history of evolution. But that was sort of like 2 or 3 layers of consciousness ago. And at this point, I'm sure most of the people who are tuning into this audience are well beyond the kind of tribal mythic membership consciousness that spawns this kind of a thinking. And as you can say, it's fear-based, judgment-based, and you could say in a way that it's horrifying enough to have a capricious madman running this country. We don't need one running the whole universe. So most of us just sort of move away from that map and say, it's just too scary, too traumatic. So I'll set that one aside. I just want to leave it out because, we really need, as citizens of that legacy, to acknowledge that that's boiling in part of our ways we make the mix. So the second map is one that some in this community may know more of. It's the Tayardian Map. And if you're trying to pick up on the word, just on hearing, the word I'm saying, Tayardian, is Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, was that distinguished Jesuit priest and paleontologist of about a half century ago. He died in 1955. And during his life, he broke ground in many, many ways. He was a Jesuit priest, very, very devout, but was also a first-rate paleontologist. He participated in the actual discovery of the Peking man, which at the time was the oldest recognizably human form, anthropoid form that we discovered. So he was a first-rate scientist, very, very credible within his field. But his interest is that more than anybody else, he took the lead and still sort of set the benchmark for transplanting Christianity from that tiny little Newtonian flat earth pot into something resembling the modern cosmos in its size, its scale, its antiquity, its dimension. He transformed it onto a new basis so it could actually get in dialogue with modern science. And most of our work, I think, in Sand and other places, which involves a serious dialogue between religion and science, really in some ways or another, either directly or indirectly, will be standing on the shoulders of Teilhard. So of course, for this work and for his map making, he got silenced by the church and exiled. He wasn't allowed to publish any of his papers other than strictly scientific papers during his lifetime. So if you think you got in trouble with the Catholic Church, Maurizio, poor Teilhard got really trounced. But from right along, people found their way to him, as they always do when somebody's speaking truth. And his map has some major features that I think we desperately need. We're still not using even this map well enough, and it's 100 years old now. Contained in his book, The Human Phenomenon, you may also hear it in the earlier translation, The Phenomenon of Man. But here he sets out to do a vast universe story, and he brings three pieces to the puzzle that I think are extremely useful and helpful. First of all, he gets the scale right. He's working in a universe that's 14 billion years old. He's working in an Earth that's 4.5 billion years old. And of course, these 4.5 billion years our human span is just this tiny little iota at the very end of it. We may maybe go back 200 million years, you begin to see the first of what you might call the fauna, the animal forms. And by 50 million years, you're seeing the formation of the mammalian chain. And maybe by 200,000 years, you're seeing the first of what can be the early headwaters of the human species. So he gives us this vast time scale, and he also encourages us to think in terms of this vast time scale. He's got a really interesting and sobering thing that I was almost going to read a little bit of it in May, but he says there was this uprising, that on the one side of it. Let's see if I can find it. This is actually kind of interesting. That the beginning of what would be the movement toward human forms was just starting to happen, and then there was a little bit of a setback. That the Earth went into this kind of temporary disruption. He says, after the lower Quaternary age, geologically, the curtain falls. During the intermission, the trinal deposits are infolded. The red soils of China are gullied out, ready to receive other thick mantle of yellow leaves. Africa grows somewhat more fissured. Everywhere, glaciers advance and recede. when the curtain rises again some 60,000 years ago, and we can set the scene, the pre-hominids have vanished, and the Earth in the new setting is occupied by the Neanderthals. So we're steaming along, and then there's this little hiatus of 60,000 years. And on the other side of it, boom, all of a sudden we have human beings back again. It's like it went underground for 60,000 years and picked up again. And along the whole way, you know, a stray meteor will knock out another 10,000 years. Dinosaurs disappear, you know. So like 10,000 years, we're not talking about the wiping out or the correction of a phenomenon that goes back to the Depression or World War II, or even the roots of ancient Greece. We're talking about when we look at a cataclysm of perhaps this proportion, we have to get used to thinking of it in terms of geological eons. Because it's only when you really set the scale bigger than human history that you begin to see the real sources of the hope that are moving toward you. And I'll hold back to that thought again. But he does also encourage us to think big scale and to go part and say that what we may actually be having a grandstand seat at, us lucky human beings, is to witness one of these seismic geological shifts in the composition of the human atmosphere, of the planetary atmosphere. Geosphere, biosphere, surrounding electromagnetic belts. This may be bigger than just human beings, you know, getting sick. So he encourages us always to maintain this vast planet-centric scale of time. The other thing that happens in the Tayardian map is that blame drops out. That for Tayard, that this shit that happens, the dinosaurs dying, the meteor strikes, the surface crinkles and wrinkles are all part of what he calls in French tâtonnement, which we translate as trial and error. And basically they're the legitimate kind of hazard and play of chance that operates in any healthy evolutionary system when all possibilities are tried, and over the course of time, they will all be tried, and some of them will be dead ends. So we can't go around and compute a lady and her husband eating an apple as the cause of human sinfulness. That we have to see that it's built into this constant process of experiment, feedback, trial, and error. And in that, we humans are relieved of any sort of burden except perhaps the species burden of having morphed into an invasive species on the planet. And this finally then, Tayard also holds out to us in his map a deep sense of cosmic hope. But again, it flows over very deep time, eons. As a biologist and as a paleontologist watching the whole rise of the whole phenomenon of life over at least 4.5 billion years, he says that across all the lines of development, you can say that evolution is one thing. It's a rise in consciousness. There's been a steady stream from the beginning, evident in individual lines of species, evident in the development of the whole planetary consciousness, that over the millions and billions of years, it's becoming more and more conscious. And as a Christian mystic, he finally steps up to the plate and owns that he thinks that for him, this is because Christ is in the heart of the earth, taking over as the reins of evolution and drawing us toward a final consummation in love. But he sets up his book very carefully so that you don't have to put it in those Christian mystical terms to get the main point. The main point is there is an inherent resilience, resourcefulness, and teleology in the in the planet. Teleology means it has its own purposiveness. It's going somewhere. So, and that will meet us. That will rise to meet us as we move in. We're not dealing like we were in old Newtonian models with this dull, dead, inert, unthinking backdrop for our human activity. The planet has intelligence. It has a world soul. And it's a self-specifying system, a seamless whole that will intuitively pick up when things are out of balance and right them. And that we're already seeing signs of its tremendous resilience. As soon as the human species got spanked and sent to its room for a while, immediately the atmosphere begins to clear. The water's clear. The plant life comes back. You know, people wander around the planet nowadays and say if there's any silver lining to this cloud, it's the fact that the Earth is so quickly responding to our lack of intrusive behavior. It's recovering so rapidly, and you can almost see it reaching out to us. So for me, that's the strongest message in Tayard, that aside from the scale, that we are met. And that he also makes it very clear that even in worst case scenario, and let's take the ultimate thing, to say that the human species gets wiped out. That the highest benchmark of consciousness achieved by this species will not disappear from planet. And 60,000 years from now, boom, at some random point, it'll pick up again. All is not lost. And so I think this tremendous thing, I mean, it's a pretty faint hope because I'm not going to get to see it, but it does give us a sense of calm, that if you can plant your feet in a large enough picture, all this kind of frantic, over-personal fear calms down a little, and we can listen a little bit more subtly to what's actually rising to meet us beneath our feet and maybe rise with us. So at this point, I want to move to the third map. I think that where Tayard's map is weak is that it doesn't give us enough of a sense of what we can actually do. Right where the Old Testament map was so in your face, you're a sinner, you've gotten out of line. It gives us nothing except to say, well, you know, the rising tide of consciousness is invincible. You know, enjoy the ride until you die. But it doesn't tell us what we're doing wrong. And some would say, in fact, that Tayard, if he has any weak link, he got a little bit too cozy with technology too fast and had a little bit too much of a sort of naive scientific faith that, you know, any pickle we got into, we could get out of or with better chemistry. And I think it's precisely that assumption which is so under challenge right nowadays. So the Imaginal Map is the third one I want to look at. And it's, as I say, this will be very much, it's been a map I've worked with in my own life very quietly for at least 20 or 30 years. It comes basically from the great tradition of Sophia Perennis, it's perennial wisdom. But I like the variation that was brought to it, the clean, fresh, new element that was introduced by one of my favorites of spiritual teachers, G.I. Gurdjieff, in the early 20th century. And so I put the two of them together in my book to form what I really call the Imaginal Map that I'm steering with, and it's that I want to share with you. I'm gonna take a liberty and read a little. You know, one of the things I got doing during the pandemic shutdown was I started pumping out a series of blogs on my own website on a certain set of spiritual exercises that Gurdjieff had put out, and I realized, since they've just been republished in a version where they're now publicly accessible, that it might actually be good for people, rather than just sitting around and spending their day on Zoom conferences like this, to actually work with some of these transformational exercises alone in their rooms. So since these had before that been really kind of closely guarded within the inner sanctum of the work, and all of a sudden they're out there, I figured I could at least write a few introductory commentaries to take up the gap for people. So on this one, I really, they're short. I'm introducing what I mean by this map that I'm working on. And since I got the wording pretty succinct, I might as well read a couple of paragraphs and comment on them rather than just sort of fumbling for words. So here goes. The world's sacred traditions unanimously teach that there are other realms beyond our own, several higher, a few lower, each one furnishing a different set of conditions for the manifestation of divine creativity. Our own Christian notion of heaven and hell is an attenuated version of what's more broadly unfolded in the great cosmological roadmaps as the great chain of being. And Ken Wilber and many, many other people refer to that map. The map depicts an elaborate procession of worlds within worlds, stretching from the unfathomable abyss of the divine unmanifest through progressively more variegated densities, angelic, causal, imaginal, material, until it finally meets its endpoint in total density in what ancient cosmologies called outer darkness and contemporary cosmologies call a black hole. So we have this ancient map, and it's amazing how, even though it's mythological in some ways, and it's certainly universal, it still will transpose better than you may think to our present cosmological understandings. And I think Joel Primack and Nancy Abrams, who bookended me on the platform a couple of years ago at SAND, have actually been leaders in this field, particularly Nancy. And when she writes that, that our little Earth is what she calls Midgard, out of Tolkien, this little tiny place, and that dimensions of space and time really cease to have any operation beyond this immediate little bandwidth we're in, she's actually really extending the scope back to a way to incorporate these other realms that have been known about forever and ever. And to just, if we can just get over using the old dichotomy between spirit and matter, shift the whole thing to an energy base and say what these realms are more and more subtle and intense conditions of energetic density, which allow different things to happen because they're different densities. Then you've got the ancient great chain of being map transposed into modern language, which I think could actually begin to pass muster in dialogue with science. And I will try and angle at some reasons why I think it might actually be worthwhile to have that dialogue and not just roll our eyes and keep the camp separate. But anyway, the one thing that all these maps have in common, although they would never use this language, the traditional great chain of being map is a redshift map. What it basically means is that as the light, as the energy, as the intensity streams out from the Holy Sun, absolute source, most divine, and goes out through these worlds, it gets denser, slower, more materialistic, more leaden, more separated, more coarse. And this is a common feature of all the maps. And so that you'll see it even when you look at the Eastern models of these maps that Ken Wilber uses, that our world is looked upon as coarse, dense, divided, heavy, and that the journey is always seen as an ascent to God. The innovation that Gurdjieff brought to this map is that, let's see if I'll read that again. I'll read that part. To this elaborate roadmap, Gurdjieff adds an all-important new twist. In his ray of creation, his equivalent for the great chain of being, the energy does not simply stream out from the divine center in a continuous cosmic redshift. Something is returned as well. Each realm has a contribution to make to the well-being of its neighbors, so that along the entire ray, energy is not only lost, but also gained. Entropy does not have the final word. In other words, the whole system becomes a single gigantic self-specifying system, maintaining its dynamic equilibrium through the continuous exchange among its parts. In other words, let's unpack this. You got these little chain of being with all these little Christmas tree balls going out, but the system is not just entropic. It doesn't wind up in a cold, dead equilibrium. That through the exchange between the realms, we hand something back and create a counter-entropic property that holds the whole thing in a kind of dynamic homeostasis. And so the whole thing, not just our planet has intelligence, our megalosolariverse, our multiverse has intelligence, all parts being held together in dynamic whole. So what does that have to do with us human beings? We're down here in a realm that has traditionally been referred to in the ancient mystical cosmologies as mixtus orbis, the mixed realm. And in the good old maps, that means because we stood on the bridge between matter and spirit. Now you could say we stand on the bridge between energy manifesting as matter and energy manifesting in more subtle forms. We go back and forth. We're really naturally fluent in both realms. And it seems like human beings, and particularly human consciousness, is absolutely evolutionarily wired to mediate between these two realms in terms of this great food chain. What that means is that human beings, by virtue of the self-reflexive and transformative properties of our consciousness, are transformers of meaning. And that what we do is create bodies of things which are actually energies. We're great energy converters and transformers, where we take the gross, dense material of this form, draw from it meaning, and hand that meaning up into higher realms where it becomes food for those realms. To put that a little bit more practically, that everything we human beings do has an energy signature, for better or for worse. When we tear down forests and plow up fields to make shopping malls, we're not just destroying the environment on one level, we're also belching into the environment the toxin of greed. And when we huddle around behind our masks, behind our closed doors, whatever we may lie to ourselves that we're doing, you can go out there and smell it. We're emitting into our atmosphere the toxin of fear. And you have crowds that can get topped up and in the anger of, anger, hostility, group rage, Gestapoism, that we create these energy signatures. And what we are really asked to do in human terms is to use the fruits of our own consciousness, our own reflected marrow of our human life, to put into the world some qualities which were classically known in the tradition, I think very helpfully so, as the fruits of the spirit. We human beings can generate out of lives lived worthily and decently, with integrity, with sincerity, and with generosity. The fruits, and let's see if I can name them, they're 8. They're in Corinthians: love, joy, peacefulness, gentleness, forbearance, kindness, self-control. I'm leaving one out, but you get the drift. And the thing is that these are what we call them down on this earth, we call them virtues. But in this whole great system of reciprocal feeding, they're actually food. They're substances. You know, compassion has a substantiality. You can feel it. Caring has a substantiality. You can feel it. Fear has a substantiality. You can feel that. And so we are really being asked to put into this world for the health of and for the help of our planet these subtle elements that become fear or that become food for the higher sphere. And when we do so, we offer up our proper gift as human beings from our niche in this great chain of being into the whole of the world. And we receive back blessing, wisdom, guidance, and support from the whole, plus some actual healing of the physical earth. You know, I've long suspected that there has been some, as what you might call, imaginal relationship between this surge of autoimmune diseases and cancers on our planet and some of the frenetic, you know, demonic, stressed behavior of human beings. And I'm not talking here individually. You can't do this on an individual basis, but species-wise. Gurdjieff was pretty blunt. We are required as human beings to do this, to alchemize out of the fruits of our own conscious labor and intentional suffering, these gifts of the spirit as nurturance for the whole ecosystem. And when we fail to do that, the whole system sickens and dies. It becomes, you know, it becomes malnourished. And I would actually, using that model, pinpoint that what we human beings have done over a long time, but particularly since the Renaissance days, is rather than becoming baby citizens of the imaginal causality, which is where we really belong, and transformers of meanings and offers of these gifts of our own consciously integrated lives, we've become apex predators. We just do what the lions can do, and we do it even worse than the lions. You know, we take over, we dominate, we invade, arrogant. You know, that using the maps that we've used to say that we have a right to pry into anything. And we have so little knowledge and so much arrogance. We have so little knowledge of, let alone the biosphere. But the biosphere is related to the geosphere, the rocks and the earth that Tayard has loved so much. And we have no idea how our messing and invasive and constant tampering with the genome pool, with the electromagnetic field of the earth, we don't know what we're doing. We don't know what violations, because we don't think big enough. We just think, well, you know, we want better TVs and we want to download, you know, Netflix. So we've lost our sense of being a microcosm of the whole. So I would say if there is one missing element singularly absent in our time that I think could shift the whole mess, it's courage. When I look around, when I walk on the streets, when I look in people's eyes, when I read the news, if I can stand to, I just see this terrible fear, and often fear masquerading under all the wrong things, masquerading as love for your neighbor, but I don't see love for my neighbor in people's eyes. I see your neighbor's going to give you cooties. Fear for your life. I mean, and you can't deny what you're picking up, the smell of things. And I'm not talking about that kind of reckless, brash, quote, quote, courage of the people that gather out to have Make America Great rallies, you know, just sort of bring it on, or that kind of thing that says, oh, I'm invincible. But there's a different kind of courage that we've always known in the monastic, in the classical traditions of both East and West. It's a fundamental part of spiritual training, and it goes something like this. Whether I live or die, I am the Lord's. You can't fall out of this great gay happening illimitably earth, as E. E. Cummings called it. Wherever you go, even if you stop being your own discrete little bit of the conscious pixel you are, you still belong to the whole, and the whole belongs to you. And it's from that willingness to quietly and calmly assume, to die before you die, as they say, is to say, well, you know, it's okay. That what I'm really called to do as a human being is not so much to prolong my own 60 or 70 or 80 years of life, but to offer the gift of my own transformed heart into the undying whole. And when you can find that place, it creates a whole different field around you. For one thing, you get a lot more clear. I mean, you stop obsessing so much about going back and reading the day's, you know, death counts and who's safe and where the disease is going and who's being tested. You just keep your eye on that larger perspective and make a mantra of those things: faithfulness, kindness, love, gentleness, peace, joy. And try to bear them in your own quiet, calm being in any circumstances that you find yourself in, whether with your neighbors at the food line, or alone on the boat, or out with the eagles, or in the rush of a crowd. But I think that if we could muster this great sense that what's happening is part of a biological phenomenon, or I think it's a geological phenomenon, actually, geobiophenomenon, that we aren't going to be able to turn around with our cleverness, but what we can recoup out of it is a powerful, powerful, iconic image of what the human condition in its finest and deepest and most transformed has brought to the crisis. And if we could really collectively monitor that, and it's right on the other side of being willing quietly to lay down your life. Right on the other side of that is the courage that I believe would calm the atmosphere, which is so at this point roiled up with fear, as well as all this stuff we're doing to it, that it would quieten things. I would not go so far as to publicly say that it would turn things around, but it sure wouldn't hurt. And, you know, I just want to conclude my comments here with one little story that actually happened to me about 4 years ago, when I was on my first visit to Tintern Abbey, right there on the English-Welsh border, the poem that's made famous by Wordsworth, the lines written above Tintern Abbey. Well, I'd never been to the place, and I didn't know till I got there what it was. It was an old Cistercian monastery. And for 400 years, it was sort of like the real driver of really intense Roman Catholic Trappist or Cistercian spiritual practice in its corner of the UK. Brilliant, brilliant spiritual work. Well, it died one night in a rampage, in some of the chaos of the act of the dissolution of the monasteries in the wake of Henry VIII and all that kind of stuff going on. And in a night, and I think it was December of 1534, the armies of Oliver Cromwell fell upon the thing, burned the roof, ransacked it, took all the monks of noble birth into captivity and killed all the rest. done. So as I was there 400 years ago, 4 years ago, lying in this great outline of the building with this cathedral roof open to just the skies, and prostrating myself before where the altar had been, I heard a voice. That the spiritual energy in that room got stronger and stronger, and I heard a voice saying, "Shh, bad things happen." I knew how the election was going to come out. The election was the next day. And he says, atrocity happens, brutality happens, it will be okay. He says, see, we died and you're listening to us now. Something remains, something beyond time. And we have to trust, by whatever map, we have to trust that remaining and not allow the face of the human being to become tarnished within us. And if we can reach out brightly, in courage, in confidence, and in humility, even if we don't turn an immediate corner on the disease, we will have recaptured it as a real portal into finer recesses of what the human heart is capable of manifesting.
Can we just take a moment to take this in, that incredible, mind-blowing, heart-opening map? Just take a moment. Thank you, Cynthia. Wow. So hard to bring words to and carry the thread. One thing I would like to bring here is a thread we have been exploring throughout the different conversations. And thank you so much for bringing the cosmological and planetary map, roadmaps, and putting things in eons perspectives. That's really, that's a gift, precious gift. In many spiritual traditions, there is the ascent to God, to spirit, but there is also the journey of descent, right? There is the journey of crisis where we get to meet the holy wounds or the places in us that for some reason we have been gifted those wounds.
Yeah.
In the Christian tradition, how does one meet a crisis? How does one meet grief or death?
Well, again, that's the Christian tradition. If you pierce right to the heart of it, at the heart of it is what they call the paschal mystery, which is Jesus's death on the cross. But and people are always trying to sort of end run that or throw it out or say that's morbid. And if you've grown up in Catholic churches with the writhing Christs on the cross, you can feel that way, but you can't end run it because it's like a very intense icon of the whole thing. That and it both says that the only way out is through, and that the other thing is that it's not just about my individual pain, it's collective pain, and that for each one of us, in bearing a little part of our own grief and in doing our part of our own work, we're bearing a part of the collective pain body of the whole and easing it. I think one of the things that needs to be slightly recalibrated in the maps is the old ascent descent thing. That what we've tended to do on the classic Great Chain of Being maps is to put God at the top or source or whatever, And I think what we really need to do is to come around more to what some of the modern spiritual cosmologists, like my friend Barbara Brown Taylor, are saying, and saying, God is the whole thing. God is not just at the top. And that means that it's no longer ascent and descent. It's more like breathing in and out, in and out, in a wonderful circle in which catabasis and anabasis, as they call it, ascent and descent, in and out, receiving, giving back, are all part of the one same motion. So in that way, it relieves us from having to prefer one part of the life to the other. Wherever you are, you do your work. It's all holy. And know that they're all connected and they're being held in a deeper whole. So I think once again, with that as a baseline, come back to what I was saying before I took a breath for air, is that in the capacity to die before you die, and if you're a committed Christian, you get this wonderful advantage because there's some deep kinetic sense that Christ is already there lining that way for you. Any number of people say, well, you die and you meet Christ. But there's a sense that this passage is so hard to go through on your own if you just feel yourself a disconnected, little powerless human being. But to know that someone of the stature of divinity is there personally holding a place for you and with you, it gives you always an instant reservoir of refuge, of strength, of resilience. And while Christians may have kind of expressed it in the most, they've really sort of milked that one, but all the traditions have a tradition of taking refuge in one of the ones more powerful and more advanced along the path that personally cares for us. One of the things that I also love about the Imaginal Map is that we do receive help that closely gathered around us in, just there in the room, felt presences, but not visible, are what you could call our saints and our beloveds who are working with us on it. And I know this a lot because of the work I've been doing with, some of my teachers and beloveds that are on the other side. They're not gone. Thomas Keating is kicking butt right now, you better believe. And you can feel it. But the problem is that our fear and our isolation and all these little maps that we've generated in the psychiatry of our times make us so isolated and so self-preoccupied that we can't access the help that's reaching out to us, So that keeping calm and that dying before you die immediately aligns you with imaginal reality, and help flows toward you, so that you know that there will be something there to meet what has to be met.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for also relieving us from the old map of ascending.
Yeah.
Really
No more flags and
no more need for ascending.
Oh yeah, no more need to ascend. Yeah, there is no up, there is no down.
No down.
Yeah.
That's freedom.
Yeah.
I wonder, could you just, before we open for questions from our from the audience and the community, cosmic hope. We just have misunderstood so much in contemporary times, hope. Yeah. We've made it something personal. It's about what I think it should be. Can you just elaborate more about the cosmic hope?
Our great mistake is that we tie hope to outcome. I hope I win a new Cadillac. I hope I escape the coronavirus. I hope, we get back to school soon, and if you get the outcome you want, then you're happy. And we equate that happiness with the outcome as being hope, and we think that that's what gives us hope. Not right. Hope is a primordial force. It's a primal force that boils up from the center of the earth in our being and gives us the capacity to be fully present and fully what you might call strong. in whatever the circumstances. There's a wonderful final passage in the Old Testament book of Habakkuk where he's sitting around and he says, though the vine doesn't yield and the crops are all dead and the cattle run off, yet I will rejoice in the Lord in the joy of my God, my Savior. This is a hope that is not tied to outcome. It's a hope that comes to us as our natural trousseau, our birthright, by being citizens of this wide, wonderful planet. And as we stand quietly in wonder and simply breathe, hope is what we breathe. Teilhard would say that because evolution is a rising tide of consciousness, the atmosphere of the earth is hope. So we have only to help ourselves and then go and do what we have to do. All our outcomes are going to get undone anyway, so let's not even go there.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Should you open it up?
Yeah, let's see some questions. Someone who hasn't, Bruce
Corwin. Bruce.
Hi, coming live from the great state of New Jersey in the U.S. Had a question. As I hear you talk about this, it's quite hopeful. As I look at CNN, I've never seen such. This is not the country that I grew up in, and obviously we didn't have mass media. And as I look at what's going on, and you mentioned our president, I've never seen such division in our country, and it's a cultural division. It isn't even a political division, and then we have Christianity on the right, and I'm curious, and so it looks to me, I don't see it sort of turning around, and I know that there's a long history of religious groups going to war with one another, and I'm just trying to figure out what our best response to that is, and I think about how much is this about? How much activism should there be? I kind of feel like when I go on social media and I get in front and I go back and forth on, with people who are have an opposing view, that it's completely pointless, that no one's listening to each other. And I sort of wonder whether it's really just about consciousness and the people who are around me and creating some of the energy that you talk about and trying to change the vibrations of the world. And because the environment does seem hopeless and everybody talks about, we're all coming together, and it's just not true. Maybe it's true in other countries, and I get a sense that they're handling it better. But in our country, it's sort of us versus them.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you. Thanks. A very good observation. And I would say, your instinct is quite right there, that the sphere where you're going to have the most effective work is not in arguing and action and activism per se, but in really kind of connecting your energy field with the energy field of others around the planet. It's really the wonderful thing about an imaginal reality is that energies, really respond in non-localized action. They don't require initiatives. They don't require that kind of stuff. They just are. They instantly will gravitate and find other like-minded souls and configure as they do. So I would say the first work is to maintain your own self, and to maintain yourself in some points a very, very healthy balance, so that you become more embodied. And I don't mean embodied in the sense of going to the gym, but in meditation and exercises, whatever you need to allow yourself to really sense yourself as fully alive and here, to keep yourself quiet, to keep yourself as much as you can within the atmosphere of your own poise. And as you do that, the rest is going to be interesting. What's fascinating to me, and again, if you can set the framework out here so you're not thinking immediately up front in terms of political action, but going back and forth, is there's something really fascinating to me, horrifying but fascinating, at how the divisions and divisiveness is working out in this country. In point of fact, if I want to be completely politically unclear, cool, I would be like Mercutio and say a plague on both your houses. You know, I don't know what's worse, the kind of reckless, divisive, nah, in your face of the right, or the scared, creeping around pseudo wisdom of the left that's scared of everything, and the media seems to be in the grip of one pole or the other. But I kind of suspect that this reckless energy that's getting thrown out by this little, Trumpian revivalism it is going to have its real effect in shaking up the pack. It's neither good nor bad, it's catalytic. And rather than arming against it or getting reactive with it, it's like watching, because there's a kind of cool thing going on there as people, for various reasons, come back together. We had a guy here in Maine that, he said, "To hell with all of you, I'm opening my brewery." And he opened it, even though we're shut down in the state, and he had 150 people lined up in the line outside, chatting each other up and talking. And, it was kind of hilarious. And as far as I know, none of them has gotten the virus. So there's some pieces that are not in, and to watch how the combinations are playing with each other, and to watch them from a kind of dispassionate curiosity, I think may help. We aren't done with this scenario yet. And we just can't push to the conclusion yet. We got to keep ourselves calm and keep playing the game.
Thank you.
We didn't hear, Bruce, you said something.
I just said thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, you're
Okay,
welcome,
good.
Bruce. My regards to New Jersey.
Thanks, that was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
Just in the set of questions, just to understand that we tend to give a precedence to voices that have not been heard in this community. So when you ask, but please continue asking. Don't feel shy, like Jeff Donald. Don't be Stefan. Don't feel shy to ask again. But if we have a choice, we'll tend, and we want to also,
weaving in more voices,
and also alternate between. So Heather.
Oh, you unmute.
Can you see me? Hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for all of this, heart-bursting stuff. I wanted to reach back into our previous conversation. There was a young human who asked a question about looking into the trauma in their life and the aloneness that exists there. And when I hear you speak, you never say it explicitly, but all of your words are imbued with a lack of loneliness. It's so clear, the connection. And I'm wondering if you could speak into, maybe it's a trauma response that we feel alone when we're facing our own trauma and attempting to come back into wholeness, in the dying unto the mui, or into the undying whole, I think you referred to it as, how trauma, aloneness, and that offering all weave together.
Yeah, that's a huge topic, and I'm really, really touched that you picked it up, and that when you say that I exude non-aloneness, that's a pretty cool thing for you to see, because the circumstances of my life is that I live alone. I'm sort of like a monk in the world, but I think the problem really is that in our culture, in the world we live in, and under the conventions we live in, what we've really tried, we've reified the ego self. That means we've made it cold and hard. And we sort of locate our identity in terms of our physical body and the soul inside it that runs it. So we feel like isolated little bits and pieces. And so when we get chopped off here, I noticed that one of the things that was driving an immediate proliferation of all my friends into these kinds of, let's pray together on Zoom, let's study together, let's be alone because we can't be alone, you know. And so this reaching out desperately to fill the void with conversation, when ironically, as you begin to develop the inner platform to go deeply down inside, and this means you have to basically stop using your mind as the main center of it and allow it to be actually centered and contained further down in your being. One of the first things that happens is the whole web that exists immediately becomes present to you. You discover the absolute illusion of thinking that you're alone. All humans are interconnected, and we're not only connected with each other, but we're connected with humans that have left the planet and those that haven't been born yet. And this all, and I'm not trying to speak here in a kind of, you know, mystical emoting. There's some actually fairly strong technology to it, that as you begin to learn to stay really, really centered with your attention focused in your solar plexus and extend the field outward from the field of your extension outward through sensation, you create a space in which more and more can come into your life that's not bound by either place or time. And it just happens. I don't think there's any spiritual tradition that would say otherwise. They all have wonderful practices that begin with this understanding of a universal interconnectedness. But the problem is that we Westerners, again, in our arrogance, have so alienated ourselves from this living stream of sustenance that we really have compounded the problem with this kind of, artificially induced loneliness. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't feel real going down. It does. But it's not the whole story. And when you have the courage and the support to dig deeper in yourself, you discover it's not the whole story. And to try and explore what actually does live within me, what's it connected to, is the beginning of a journey that's so vast and so in some ways triumphant that, it's good work to do now while we're physically separated. That a lot of my people, when I kind of encourage them to pull the plug a little bit on their horizontal contacts and lean into their emptiness, are already reporting back, discovering vast reservoirs of both strength and interconnectedness in them that they never knew they had. But you do.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Cynthia. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Cynthia. Donald McLeod, yes?
Yes. Thank you.
I use this speech synthesizer because I am speech disabled due to a brain injury, but I can understand everything you say. I am kinda like Stephen Hawking in that regard. My comment and question are, I left Catholicism 3 years ago. The main reason for my departure was the belief that heaven can only be achieved when you give up your physical self. My belief is that you reach heaven when you give up your egoic self, just as Jesus had suggested, not when you die physically. My thinking is that the Catholic Church will have to give up that idea or face irrelevancy. In fact, I believe that is what is holding back our nascent revolution in consciousness. I would like to understand your thoughts on that.
Beautiful question.
Well spoken, brother. Very well spoken. And I would want to say that from the point of view of my understanding of the tradition, you're 100%, 1,000% right. Heaven is not a place you can die into. It's a place you have to be born into. And, you know, and if you haven't gotten it by the time you're physically dead, you know, and over and again in the mystical tradition, the beginning of eternal life is seen when you are reborn again of water and the spirit. And I'm not talking here about some funky ritual. I'm talking about a deeper understanding when, just as you say, you die to self. And you begin to then awaken to heaven, which I think is the vestigial remains in our miserable, small, boxy theology of this whole greater sense of imaginal reality. So you are right, and once again, it's because the church has so zealously protected its dogma. And the dogma tends to be too small in the first place because it's the mind trying to do concepts that only the heart can understand. So that being said, I would say that, life is just too short to waste it battering your head against the Catholic Church. And it doesn't require leaving it any more than it does regular attendance. I mean, it's like this on all levels of all religions. The outer levels are always too coarse. They're being superintended and rammed down your throat by people that just are not really credentialed on the inside. And what people tend to do after they go through a period of being intensely disappointed and betrayed, they say, well, you just can't change it that much. So you look and you hunker down with the people that are on your wavelength, and you find the circles that take you into the next level of understanding that does exist in the church. And you work with them, and that opens out into the greater tradition, and you connect with the saints there that would say the same thing to you, Don. Of course you're alive. Of course you're in heaven. Welcome. Don't you see us, brother? So you just sort of forgive the church in its idiocy. Woman's ordination, what next? Its life is too short. I mean, it's just the way the form is going to be in this world. It really takes its cues from worlds that are far lower than where we can work from. And I don't think reform of the church is ever at a project that it's worth losing your life for. There's better ways to reform it. But I do agree with you, and I do envision that. Imagine what would happen if from something like a church, real wisdom could be spoken.
Yeah.
Imagine what would happen. And, toward the end of his days, my own teacher, Thomas Keating, was becoming that kind of person. When he spoke in the last 5 years of his life, what came out was this radiant, world-inclusive wisdom. And I just looked at him, and the strength and the power out of his big hands to post blessing on people. But if there was someone of that stature that could speak in the name of Christianity, wow, how the world would change if we had some people. The Dalai Lama is doing a marvelous job holding down the turf as best he does, but we desperately need more luminous beings to speak truth to power. And so all I could say is that I salute you on your question. Don't waste too much time in bitterness and disappointment. There's more ahead of you than behind you.
And do you think the Catholic Church is keeping us from our conscious revolution?
Yeah, I didn't get all of what you said there. Can you, take it, read it? Yeah. technology. You gotta love it.
I believe that is what is holding back our nascent revolution in consciousness.
Yeah. I don't think there will be a revolution in consciousness, you know, that things tend to come much more gradually like that. I mean, a few years ago, everybody was all hyped up about the non-dual revolution, and they were having great conferences about harmonic convergence and all that sort of stuff. It doesn't come like that. It comes quietly. And it's always tentative, and it always looks better in times of plenty, and then things get wiped out and we go right back to being animals again. There's an old Hasidic saying that says the world at any time in history is held in its orbit by 36 conscious souls, and they don't know each other, and they don't even know if they're one of the 36. But it's the quality of their own work, in secret, as it's called in the tradition, which just means in isolation from any kind of connected network, that nevertheless affects the change in the planet. And that's the revolution in consciousness that I really take seriously. I believe in those 36 conscious human beings. I believe there are even 36,000, maybe even 36 million. I wouldn't doubt that you're one of them. Do the work. Do the work. It's in God's hands.
That what I'm doing, I am working. I'm working. Nervously now.
Yep. Yep. I can see you're working. Just keep it up. Just keep it up. This is what we need. Quiet, humble individuals in their own place. My teacher, Rafe, who was a hermit monk at Snowmass, used to say, no conscious work is ever wasted. And it will flow back into the greater atmosphere of our beloved planet. And that is the revolution. And nothing can stop it.
Wow.
Thank you, Donald.
Thank you, Donald. Thank you, Cynthia. Just unlikely is the time we have. This has been the curse of this.
And the blessing.
And the blessing is just,
Yeah.
Oh my God. Heaven is not a place you die into. It's a place you are born into.
And Rev Deborah Johnson said something beautiful the other day. She said, everyone wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. That's the pearls of this time. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, it's fly now and pay later. Why not?
So thank you so much. I have no doubt that many of this entity holding the world, many are here in this circle. There is no doubt.
Oh, good. So out here in Maine, I will return to the life of my planet, which has the next thing on my agenda to mow the grass.
Oh, like I have to do that at 4. Yeah, in 2 hours I'll do it. So we will mow.
Okay, so I bid you all thank you. Namaste. Blessings on your work, you two lovely people.
The whole amazing team and beings that we've been supported to.
And this community that makes this a reality. Each and every one of us with our voices and our energy. Thank you all. Thank you.
Okay, well, till the next time then.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you.